So now we can move forward with the panels that we have prepared for today. So we're beginning with panel number 1, Urban Intelligence, Rethinking Cities Through Data, Design, and Real Estate Innovation. Sorry. The panel brings together experts working at the intersection of technology, design, and economics to explore how data-driven tools and innovations are reshaping cities and real estate and the building environment. So starting with James Robert Scott, who's the Director of Industry and Professional Programs and a research scientist at the Real Estate Technology Hub at MIT Center for Real Estate. His work focuses on real estate automation and technologies. And then we're gonna have our second panelist, Dr. Suleiman Alhadidi, founder of AREAL, Resilient Environmental Adaptive Living, a firm dedicated to transforming cities through design, data, and emerging technologies, so very much at the core of what we're discussing here today. His work spans adaptive reuse, robotic building systems, and economic resilience. Bridging, again, architecture and urban planning, and these advanced technologies and strategies, and how it connects also to real estate investments. And finally, we will have also Sebastian Olascoaga, an economist at MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and the Director of Research and Evaluation at the City of Boston, where his research uses field experiments, causal inference, and machine learning to study how households, markets, and governments respond to shocks, with a particular focus on housing, housing risk, and health. And now it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker, James Scott, as I had mentioned, to the lectern.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to be a little bit more unique than everybody else that you're going to see this morning, if that's okay, for a number of reasons. One, we've no slides because due to technical issues, I can't connect to the deck, unfortunately. So forgive me that. And also, separately, because I'm up here on stage with some of my favorite academics in this entire industry who I love. Suleiman, who you're going to hear from next, one of my favorite people in the whole world. I've been trying to get him to MIT down the street for a number of years. We lost out to him, unfortunately. You're going to hear from Juan Palacios later on, again, one of my favorite people in the whole world. I sit in a little bit of a different juncture. I kind of sit in this magical grey area in between academia and industry. And I found myself there because, you know, you hear the wonderful, you heard that, like, I mean, incredible presentation from Holly earlier on. There's an incredible team that she works with that, I mean, that are down in that department, like the likes of Christoph Reinhardt, Sarah Williams. Even in my own department, we have Xixi Zhang, we have Albert Saiz. And one of the big issues that we have is trying to connect the dots between industry and the incredible academic work that we're all part of. And so over the last number of years, we're trying to kind of bring that bridge a little bit closer together for a number of reasons. Primarily, I'm not going to lie to you, it's try to help facilitate the funding that coincides with the academic work that coincides with it, but also more importantly to help industry better understand the value of all of the academic work that we do within the realms of our department and within the greater department that we work with. By way of introduction, oh, by the way, you hear I've got a strange accent. I'm originally from Ireland, all right? So I say that because it helps people not spend the next 10 minutes figure out if I'm from Australia or from the UK or somewhere else. I genuinely have to say that because I found myself, and too many times, people just kind of mouthing, Australian, like, I mean, like in their heads, so I try to get that out nice and quick, if that's all right. I wear a number of hats within the role that I do. So I'm a research scientist, I'm a lecturer, I teach 3 classes now at MIT. I run the Real Estate Transformation Lab, which, you know, kind of, we'll touch back to the second. I'm also the director of the program now at MIT, the master's program that we have there. That's the reason for my grey hair, which it wasn't grey last year. I promise you, there's a slide with me on it. It looks, you're kind of going, who is this guy? It's definitely not the guy on stage. But primarily, like, I mean, my main focus is, of course, the lab itself and the work that we do there. And we're a very unique lab in lots of ways. Like, I mean, everyone has always told me, like, I mean, in the world of academia, it's you publish or perish. You have to get yourself out there. And that was kind of a big issue for a lot of the stuff that we were doing, because we weren't necessarily able to publish a lot of work very, very fast, or certainly at the way a lot of industry needed to do it. So we kind of felt we had to push towards a sort of a different element and try to connect with industry in order to engage with them. And so how we do that in lots of different ways is we have an overarching theme within it, and we focus on all of the new products, processes, and technologies that are out there. And how we've been able to do that is we have merged the Centre for Real Estate's 40 years of research and understanding. It's 40 years this year. It was the first real estate program here in the United States back in 1984 when it was launched. Oddly enough, by, of course, the great Larry Bacow, who is, of course, of Harvard fame, not MIT fame in every way. And it's kind of created itself in a very incredible way, looking at how it's led industry in lots of different elements. There's now close to nearly 100 different real estate programs here in the United States, but it was the very first one. And what we've done is we've tried to merge that with MIT's technological capabilities and prowess and understanding to facilitate a research platform that really delves into this new wave of digitization that's taking place across the real estate industry. That, of course, upsets lots of people. It causes great issue. I find myself in wonderful conversations all the time, and I'm not a big guy, so I have to learn to defend myself very, very fast in lots of different situations. But it's proving very valuable to a lot of people that we work with and a lot of the stakeholders that we work with. This morning, again, this is very strange. We're basing this conversation on my personality as opposed to the slide deck, so this is going to be a very, very interesting few minutes for you guys. But really, when we're talking about technology, when we're talking about the advancements of certain levels of technology within the particular industry of real estate, with buildings, with cities, what we're really talking about is simply disruption. And that's really what's taking place at the minute in so many different ways. And, how will I describe this? Actually, maybe I'll do it this way. Hands up here in the audience. Who here has used ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity in the last, 3 days? Hands up so I can see. Okay, anyone who hasn't? One? Okay, one person, all right? But we can see, general consensus, everybody's using this, all right? Like this is here, this is now. This is a generative AI, it's a large language model that we were utilizing in everyday terms. How many people arrived by an autonomous vehicle to the GSD today? One person, an autonomous vehicle. Well done, you. Holly's ahead of the curve. She's working with Tesla, all right? She's here. We're retracting the statement, all right? If only we could. I joke. Anyone here transact a building with using blockchain technology this week? Anyone? No. All right. Well, a few people are kind of thinking, did they not? Maybe, question mark? All right, I think you can see, though, there's two particular technologies. We're talking about blockchain, we're talking about autonomous vehicles. We've been talking about them for pretty much close to 12 years, at this point in time. At a level where this is going to be a game changer. This is going to change how real estate is affected. Autonomous vehicles is going to change the whole dynamic of location. Blockchain is going to change how we register title, how we run, how we facilitate mortgages. Those things change, but yet here we are, we're still trying to figure out what those technologies are. We're still figuring it out. If anybody knows the Gartner hype cycle, anyone know that concept? We're in this trough of disillusionment in some ways. We're getting better, but we're starting to figure ourselves out with what those technologies are. And yet here we are with AI, or let's say it properly, with generative AI capabilities, and we're all here 2 years after the launch of ChatGPT-3 that we're all using it. We're all using it on a daily basis. And this technology, this specific one, is advancing so fast and so rapidly. And how is that what we're trying to understand is how are things like these technologies, how are they changing how we use buildings, how we operate buildings, how we design buildings, how we build buildings? What's happening there? How is this industry changing? And this is the most unique industry in the entire world. All right? Unlike finance, unlike biotech, I'll just pick two ones down, kind of candle-oriented ones. But this is the most unique niche I've ever found out there, and it's so unique for a number of reasons. To use an industry coined term, and I'm going to throw this out there, but unlike a lot of other industries where, let's say technology, where you can fail and you can fail and you can fail and you can fail. All right, when it comes to real estate, most people involved in real estate, the minute that they fail, their career is kind of in trouble. Their reputation is over. It's not like with technology where you can fail and you can fail and you can fail and you can win, and next thing you're the front cover of Forbes magazine, everybody wants to interview you, your bank balance is through the roof and you're crazy. Real estate is very niche. So people to take risks, to try and to implement change, to implement innovation, it's very unique. You also have this other element of real estate, is the stakeholder complexity that coincides with it. This is, everybody thinks, oh yeah, I can run a fintech company, I've done extremely well here. We'll just pivot, we'll have an offshoot of something in real estate with that area. It doesn't work like that. All right, there's so much stakeholder nuance to real estate that it's so hard to actually integrate it within a system that people you find so much more pushback than you do in far more other operations out there. And so what the question for us is, can technology help facilitate a lot more of the innovations and change that need to happen within an industry that's really, I don't say ripe for destruction because we've heard that term so much, but it needs change in so many different elements of the business that comes across it, whether that's construction, whether it's design. Well, design, I love designers, so actually I'm going to leave them, I think they're great. All right, but you think about brokerage, think about the issues you've had with paying rent. All right, or trying to get a mortgage. All of those implements. We try to understand, is there a better way? So, of course, the primary technology that is on everybody's lips at the minute is artificial intelligence. We can't get away from it. We used to have a number of very hardcore strategic lines of inquiry or investigation, but it's very hard for anyone that we work with not to want to talk more and more and more about AI. Now, this particular group of people, I don't really have to get into what AI is. I presume everybody has a semi-decent understanding of what it is. That's not me there's no point in me kind of trying to outlay it in very simplistic terms. But everybody has a very good gauge, I think, of what AI is at this moment in time on a simplistic level. And everyone has also sort of an understanding of where it's come from. It's, that term, and you don't have to go too far. I mean, every single article in the paper, it'll start off with, this term has been around since about 1956. The term itself was coined not too far away from us here, up in Dartmouth at the Dartmouth conferences, at that particular moment in time. Obviously, of course, there was a different iteration, previous to that with touring and with different people as well along the way. And then you have the traction that took place over the course of those years. With the limitations that were put in place there, the ability, the lack of computational capability, the lack of storage, the lack of technology that coincide with that. Then you had the concept of machine learning in the 80s, and then deep learning kind of late 90s, early 2000s. But it took a long time to get there. It took really to about 2001, 2002, the launch of the GPU, that advancement with GPU computing, the data storage capabilities that we've seen in the last few years, and then, of course, the computational capability that's coincided with that as well, to really kind of drive us to this next level, which is now, at this moment in time, this generative AI kind of push that we're really starting to build on and see where does this take. And for me, in lots of cases, it's actually a little bit like the missing step for a lot of the products that we work with, and a lot of the startups that we see. Again, another part of one of the 75 hats I wear, I work with so many different startups, where we're based, specifically in that concept or that area called prop tech. All right? Now, if you really want to cause a row, we'll ask everybody here in the room, what is prop tech? All right? Because there is no real true definition of that, and depending on which person you talk to or which area of focus or which marketing team from which startup you want to deal with, there's a number of different definitions of what that is. But we focus on it at a very general level. We just look at it as very simply as it's the digitization of anything that digitizes the real estate industry. Now, everybody wants to split it up into different facets, and that's great, but we try to look at all of the different facets, and we have our own basis of knowledge on how we do that as well. This technology itself, it's not just, and by the way, I've realized I'm speaking fluent Irish here at 175 miles an hour. So I'm going to just take it down a notch or a tone. I realize, imagine if I was back in Ireland, how fast and how quick I talk, how really bad things get, or worse, a pint of Guinness, in my hand. All right, God help anybody in the room. But this technology, you know, what does it do, and where does it go, and how can it change the different things that we're at? And we're ultimately trying to figure that out as well, because depending on what report you look at, you know, you've seen ones from Price Waterhouse, you've seen ones from McKinsey, I'm sure. I mean, the value of this over the next 5, 10 years. Like, we've seen anything from a 900 billion industry to a $15 trillion industry, this advancement and this capability with generative AI. But what does that mean for us? What does it mean for the buildings, for the cities? Where's the true value that we can extract from this advancement that we're seeing so much of? And that's really, again, a huge focus of what we do. We also, like, I mean, and again, this term kind of coincides, and again, I'm going to throw in a situation that causes great arguments, especially with some of my friends in the room here, all right, which leads to the automation of number elements of the industry itself. And there's two components to automation. There's, you know, simply, well, let's ask, what is automation? It's really just the use of technology or a process or a system to perform tasks with either really minimal or really no human interaction whatsoever, aiming to improve the efficiency or the productivity or the accuracy of a particular system. That's really all it is. And, you know, AI is the facilitator of that in a number of different ways. But we also kind of, we mix it up a little bit. We add in the robotic element to that as well, which really drives people insane. All right, because we've got within automation, we have AI, which, you know, I'm going to say it, it's going to cause a row in a minute, but that's the brain power. That's the software element of what we kind of look at in lots of ways. And then you've got the robotic element, which is the hardware, the strength and the capabilities that coincide with that. And then we try to understand, well, you're merging these things together. Where are we going to see the greatest levels of efficiency and change within this industry? You know, and we do it, again, across different asset classes. We do it across industrial, we do it across retail, we do it across construction and multifamily, we do it across the office environment. Like, there's simply the office environment as a question within technology and real estate. The biggest question that the commercial real estate industry has probably ever faced is, what does a future office look like? Because coinciding with that is, what does the downtown environment of our cities look like 5, 10 years from now? All right, the advancements from work from home capabilities, you know, you add that in to a situation. What does an office look like? How many people are going to it? Are they going in? What does transportation network coincide with that? Because there's so many secondary effects. You add in autonomous vehicles to that conversation. All right, and now we've seen our cities change quite dramatically, even in the last few years, because of this. Anyone been in San Francisco recently? Was it lovely? It was a little weird, yeah. It's not it's not the only place. Now, San Francisco, it's a bit unfair for me to pick on it. It's had social issues for a long time, but those social issues have been exacerbated. I mean, hang out on Market Street. Like, this is the central street in San Francisco, right? I mean, the hub of change, of innovation, of venture capital, of startups. I mean, to a power of 10 over the next city across the globe. And you're standing there on Wednesday at 2 p.m. and you're kind of going, where is everybody? And the fact that that hasn't really changed, regardless of the push and the drive and the marketing of, you know, AI is going to be the savior there, it's a real strange. Can technology help and change that? Can it change the policy the policies that have got in the way of a lot of the building processes there? All right, and some incredible work, again, coming out of MIT is really focused on that. Certain teams at the Media Lab and trying to understand, can the advancements of AI help facilitate and to make better decisions for cities to be able to, instead of going down a particular path, actually kind of stop and take a look and say, hold on, is there a better way? Nobody wants to be the next Detroit, but there are so many situations out there where you're kind of starting to ask yourself, hold on here, are we in this idea of a doom loop? And that adds a lot of really, really hard questions to a lot of cities and a lot of portfolios, a lot of buildings, a lot of investment, the money that's out there in that. Like, imagine being someone that had invested in an office building in Denver or Kansas or St. Louis over the last few years, and they're coming for $200-300 million, and finding that building has just been sold for $2 or $3 million. Like, hold on here, there's a lot of questions being asked now. Where does this all go? And so, you know, there's so much complexity to this that we try to get as much of a better understanding with all of this. As you can see, I'm hitting on a million different topics with the time that I have here, all right? But I have to make it up for with the personality and the chaos of my voice, because I've no slide deck. I'd love to show you some robotic kind of capabilities that are out there in the minute in lots of different areas of the industry. Has anyone had the experience of having a robot serve them in a restaurant? Yeah? Yeah? Yeah, that's starting to happen. Like, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? It's fun, enjoyable, a little bit gimmicky, but yeah, it's good though. It's good for the kids. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, seeing the amount of robots that are actually now being facilitated, not just at a service level, but in restaurants. Seeing what White Castle is doing with the Flippy 2 Flippy 2 robot, right? And why? Because they just can't get the people to do those jobs anymore. And the change that coincides with that as well. You look at industrial. All right? Industrial has been the darling for real estate for a number of years now for a million reasons. With the e-commerce has, with the change that took place there, the distribution networks, but also the advancements in technology that can help facilitate run that at a far more efficient level. And seeing how that all coincides, we've done a number of really interesting papers on that. Oh, sorry. I have to stop, do I? Oh, yes. Okay. I got to take some questions. You see, you can't shut me up once I get going. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Avis Devine. I'm faculty here, and I think this question about how we deal with the real estate industry when it does tend to be a little recalcitrant against change.
Yeah.
For a number of good reasons, a lot of them rooted in the variety of stakeholders that we have to get on board before we advance. Within that context, and we look at the aspects of climate change we need to address, a lot of times the theory is that we're not going to get there by incrementing our way out, but that we need more transformative change.
Yeah.
What do we do at that intersection where we've got a recalcitrant 800-pound gorilla in the climate change space and a need for not just incremental but transformational change? What do we do in the tech space?
How honest do you want me to be with that answer?
For like a 90%?
Okay. No, because I'm going to tell a story that's going to give you a little bit more insight into that from how they think. Now it's about 3 or 4 months. It's pre-summer, so I'm interviewing the head of, the idea of this conversation in an interview was to look to Europe to see, with the real estate developers and the teams over there, because they've looked at climate in a different way for a number of years. Their policies are a little bit different, and how they just have a bigger push than, let's say, a lot of the other organizations here. And the idea behind the conversation was we would look to them and pose questions to them to see how can American real estate companies learn from you, and then from that implement a stronger climate change resilience policy within your portfolios, within your development, within lots of different areas. And so the first person we asked was the head of real estate for the largest real estate owner in Europe, and he was the head of sustainability. And I asked him quite simply, was this simply a carrot or a stick situation? Was it the carrot being that with new drives towards climate-oriented technology, and that you were able to facilitate greater operational efficiency and reduce costs? So actually it was in your best interests to take on new technology. Or was this a situation that we needed to implement the stick, which was what we have here in lots of ways, like Local Law 97, a fines, and so to get people on board? And he said, he's a wonderful, beautiful French accent, and I won't do the accent, but he was so eloquent, and he was like an incredible orator. And he said, James, you don't realize, here in Europe we think about things differently. We want to do better. We think about climate in a different way, and we want to be better, and we want to make a difference across our portfolio for our customers, for our investors, and that's how we think about it. So we're always going to implement as much as we can in a strategic way the best technology to reduce our energy consumption and be a better company. And it was so lovely. I believed him. It was such a wonderful way to do it. And we had next to him, we had a wonderful guy who was the head of a German REIT, who was also a Frenchman. And he said, James, I'd like to say that man is not telling the truth. And I said, okay, well, what do you mean? He goes, that's a wonderful idea and a wonderful concept. But we as a REIT asked all of our investors last month, we had a 90-cent distribution per share to be distributed to all of our shareholders. And we asked them quite simply, would they be willing to give up 1 cent of that 90 to more sustainable efforts to facilitate climate change and reduce our energy consumption? And there was a vote within the REIT, and the vote was quite simple. It was 100% no, for 1 cent of 90 to give to that. And the reason being was because they had a fiduciary responsibility as of the fiduciaries of the shares of those in that REIT to get the maximum amount of value for the owners of those shares. And that was a really eye-opening moment. And it coincided then that you actually better understood something that the conversation alluded to, that most of the sustainability efforts within most organizations across the United States, and actually in most real estate companies, actually the budget for them comes from what? It doesn't come from their operations. All right? It doesn't come from their development team. It comes from their marketing team. And that is the scariest part of all of that. Because what you need to do there is you need to understand you're fighting an area in real estate that doesn't necessarily, is not putting this into their primary focus when push comes to shove. And secondly, you also have that situation where the money behind it all, they have a financial responsibility to ensure that they get the most maximum amount of value for their dollar. And it's not done with an ethical or a wanting to do better. It's just simply their hands are tied without proof of concept, regardless of all the incredible work that's been done from some of the best academics in the world on this to showcase that there is a true, not just efficiency, but true increase in value with this. Their ethos is, no, we're not buying it. Even though what you're selling is something that's better for us, it's better for the world, and it's a necessary change that we need to make. I hope I answered your question somewhere in there. I've gone way over time. They're going to kill me. With that, guys, thank you very much. Cool.
Well, this is what a nice segue to my presentation. I think this is really, I'm I think fortunate to be here, and I'm so excited about this. I didn't sleep that much because I'm so interested in how we use data for the good of our built environment. And let me start with a very bold statement. We are wasting our cities and we are wasting our buildings. So we're surrounded by idle assets, vacant offices, underused schools, hollowed out malls, and entire neighborhoods sitting half asleep. While we rush to build shiny new towers, enormous potential remains locked inside what already exists. Take Main Street in Nashville, for example. This is one of our pilot projects right now. Nearly 70% of the lots either vacant or underutilized, similar to what James was saying in San Francisco. Most of them, they are either for sale or rent. The irony is striking. The capacity is there, but it remains dormant. Even before COVID, ghost towers dotted our skylines. Today, 20 to 30% of global building stock is underutilized. In San Francisco, office vacancy exceeds 25%. In Chicago, 3 in 10 public school seats sit empty. In commercial real estate, Class B and C in specific offices are in deep trouble. This isn't a shortage of square footage, it's a shortage of use. Or to put it differently, it's a shortage of imagination. Traditionally, detecting inefficiency meant clipboards, surveys, and month of labor. The process was slow, biased, expensive, and often blind to seasonal patterns. Today, we could do much better, hopefully, with the advent of computer vision and IoT sensors that track real-time usage, with the satellite imagery, AI, and machine learning to classify vacancy across metros, with the digital twin that could allow us to simulate reuse versus rebuild with a better protection, and with the predictive analytics that could forecast demand after reuse for housing, retail, and services. With these tools, underutilization hopefully stops being a vague hunch. It becomes measurable, and once it's measurable, it is investable. So this is basically our mission at Ariel, the venture that I founded just a few months ago. We aim to tackle underutilization head-on, combining investment strategies with data analytics. We quantify and score buildings and sites across 4 pillars: economic resilience, economic productivity, environmental adaptability, and livability. We apply models ranging from hedonic pricing and spatial econometrics to highest and best use and option pricing for each site and lot. And this would allow us to classify sites, ghost buildings, underutilized buildings, and underdeveloped parcels. And more importantly, to identify pathways for their reactivation. So to grasp the severity of the office utilization problem, we've done and conducted 5-year-long study over 162,000 spaces across 859 companies. Later, we focused on analyzing 115 buildings. The data we gathered was through using low-resolution cameras and Wi-Fi signals. We monitored them in real time and aggregated them on a very short time frames on hourly level, providing highly granular insight. And what we know, as this graph is showing, that when COVID hit in 2020, offices emptied. But I think what is important to mention here is that occupancy has never truly recovered. And what we learned goes beyond the pandemic. So if you look at this graph, we use the peak occupancy method that we developed. We discovered that the typology of the space matters. Contrary to the conventional wisdom, after COVID, people will go to collaborate with people. Collaboration spaces were used, based on this data, far less than individual spaces. Our data showed that we could reduce collaborative spaces for this study sample by 45%, and individual spaces by 25% without hurting functionality. We were confident about this study as we aggregated the data on a very short time frames, specifically 5 minutes to 1 hour. And we tested it on multiple time frames as well. To test this in practice, I worked and we collaborated with Humanize, the work analytics company, on a project at Panasonic headquarters in Osaka, Japan, in 2018. And that was before COVID. So over 450 digital interactions and 6,000 meetings were captured. We used sociometric badges to track face-to-face interaction, then analyzed how people interact and use the space in 2 different time frames, before and after the spatial reduction. In the first time, we identified the least occupied spaces. The majority of it were meeting rooms. And in the second time, we restricted access to them to measure, to find out if they will affect the occupancy of the remainder of these offices and meeting rooms. So we reduced the meeting spaces by 80%, which translated into a 20% reduction in overall workplace. And just to remind you, this is before COVID. Think about that. A leaner footprint, lower cost, hopefully, and a smaller carbon footprint, all by rethinking usage using data analytics, not by guessing. But what about sites that are hard to develop? The leftover parcels, too many for, very too small for conventional buildings. This is one of the sites on Penny and 3rd Street that we looked into in Kendall Square in 2018, a few years ago. And what we proposed when I was at MIT back then is we explored the modular cost-limited timber micro apartments that is powered by robotic furniture. With demising wall, 1 unit could turn into 2 or more. Sounds attractive. And each 300 square foot unit could expand and transform 3 times, hosting a king bed, a dining area for 6, a full kitchen, and an extra sleeping space for a guest. We wanted to equip them with responsive lighting, all of the smart gadgets when it comes to HVAC system and healthy monitoring in order to provide a healthier environment and improve the indoor environmental quality at the time. And what you see here is a few prototypes that we worked on at the lab, at the City lab, where we automated a drop-down bed, a sliding guest room, and a closet, and adaptive kitchen, where we did many volumetric studies, and we were looking at how people use the kitchen more or less. Moving 10 years ago in Australia, we used data analytics specifically by force in a way, because at that time, SIP 65, it's an environmental act which was implemented in 2015. It required 2 hours of direct sunlight for 70% of living spaces. And people were thinking how to do that. And obviously, computational design at the time was a bit interesting, and everyone who's doing the computational design would be the superstar in a way. So what happened is that it culminated in one of these projects at 42 Morris Street in Darling Harbour, where we rethought the maximum volume, how it looked like, basically by analyzing the amount of light each living space in the neighborhood is getting, balancing livability and development economics. And this came out one of the most important global projects, in my opinion, the Quay Quarter Tower in Sydney, which was completed a few years ago. So back then, we used a digital twin of Sydney with an accuracy of around 5 centimeters to test views such as the sky view factor, to define the envelope, the views from inside to the outside, the environmental performance of the sun, exposure, and so on. What is interesting about this project is that instead of demolishing the whole building, 60% of the original structure was retained, saving 7 million kilograms of embedded carbon. Economically, reusing the structure reduced the cost by 15% compared to a full rebuild. Environmentally, the carbon savings were equivalent to taking 35,000 cars off the road for a year. In my opinion, this project and similar projects prove that upcycling isn't just as sustainable, it could be economically viable. And recently, we started this project. It's a research project that I hope that we could develop into something more. Look at, for example, Austin, Texas, with the driverless cars, autonomous vehicles, and shared mobility that is reshaping demand. Vast tracts of asphalt could be reactivated into housing, green spaces, mixed-use development, and so on. To do that, we tested this in an investment and a project at one of the projects in Nashville area, the Mina Plaza project, where we utilized part of the covered parking lots. It was once a vacant site, clinic site, with low NOI. It sits without a rent for 6 years, which makes it a very high-risk investment. We repurposed it into a mixed-use cultural destination. So from 0% lease for 6 years to 70% pre-lease before construction, and from 7% IRR if we were to use the clinical offices to 46% IRR. This is what activation could do, transform risk into resilience. So our mission is to create an economic operation system for cities, hopefully, a framework where underutilization is just not only detected, but systemically addressed. And that could be done by combining design, data, and economics all together. We can unlock idle spaces and turn them into living capital. So if we succeed, hopefully, we won't be able only saving buildings, but we were thinking cities for resilience, adaptability, and human flourishing. Thank you. I have more time to take a few questions.
Hi. I guess one of the biggest question I have is how energy is considered in the utilization of these responsive elements, and how you envision we could, how you envision the path forward, if it's like delegation of efficiency, or is it different ways of thinking about it?
So are you asking about the robotic furniture part of things?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is interesting because in my point of view, there were two major robotic companies. One of them was a spin-off, our lab, back in the day at MIT, and the other one, Bumblebee Spaces. I think there is a lot of potential here. However, I think what you could look at it as a fancy gadget to start with, like, for example, the automation side of things. It could, in a way, I think, if we look at it as reducing the footprint of housing, it could make sense. And I didn't done any study on how efficient it would be, but I think the special study that we've done looked into how small could we be, and what we realized that 300 square foot apartment is way less than 900 square foot. It's just like 1/3. So you could argue that you would be able to reduce basically the cost of the built materials in order to improve the quality of the space. So that was the trade-off, more or less.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the great presentation. I was just wondering about like the path forward and maybe scaling this project. Do you see more partnerships with municipalities, or do you see leaning more on the private sector for that?
Are we talking about the repurposing of the buildings, or
Yes.
the robotic ones?
Yeah, the repurposing of buildings.
Okay, I think this is interesting because, like, we've been discussing this idea with multiple cities. We talked with Lowell here in Massachusetts, and there's another one in Alabama. I think the challenge for all of these kind of cities is that there is a need for reactivating certain areas of the city. And you can't do it with just data analytics or design or adaptive kind of reuse. You need basically multiple actors to go into the same room. And to tell a little bit about the story of the Mina Plaza project. So luckily, we were able to secure a zero down payment for 3 years from the owner of the building to run our analysis first and then rezone the space in order to reactivate it. And that's how it made more sense to us as basically the advisors and investors into this building. Before that, without a subsidy, it won't make a lot of sense. And I've seen a report this morning actually talking about, I think it's HR&A report with the city of Boston, where they conducted really interesting economic data analytics on the repurposing of the financial district here in Boston, turning part of it into housing. And I think the government here and the city dedicated a good amount of money to help these investors do this type of work, which I think is exciting. So I think the public-private partnership type of work could be one of the ways to go.
Just a follow up on that point. So from the private sector perspective, how can private sector be more proactive to get involved in this process so that the untapped value can be utilized using your model or the process you just described? Thank you.
I think we're figuring out, similar to what Holly was saying, each different site and building is really unique. It's not only from an architect point of view, it's also from all of the players' point of view, in my opinion. So I think, can you remind me, please, with your question?
So basically, you just described the public-private partnership, and a lot of spaces actually are owned by different stakeholders.
Yep.
How can they be more proactive to participate in what you just described? This is very interesting thing to utilize the idle spaces.
Yeah.
Within the urban area, but how can they be more proactive to initiate?
Yeah, there are some initiatives that we've seen, like, for example, for empty retail and offices, you would lease it for a really short time with an encouragement for like a emergent pop-up kind of retail type of thing, where you can activate it for a short time with a very, very less fees in order to attract like basically people and traffic to the site. So I think there is some certain like creative ideas to do so. But I think unfortunately I'm also a little bit pessimistic when it comes to the current state of the real estate market, and that's unfortunate. I think there is a lot of greed in terms of like whoever is owning the sites. Like we looked into the Nashville project, the Main Street. And we found out that everything is priced in, even if you do the full development of the site. And they want to basically, and that's what actually created as a result of possibly COVID and the aftermath after COVID. So I think we are at the verge of a kind of rebalancing, I think, this demand and supply, and hopefully through any sort of people who advocate for like basically creating these type of partnerships, it could make some things work. I think the city of San Francisco have been advocating to do a lot of work in this domain. I think they engaging the city science group and a few people from MIT over there to tell them basically based on the data what's needed and what the problem is. I think for us, we use AI and machine learning to understand the problem rather than proposing anything generative or a solution for the problem to start with.
We have time to take one more question. I can see one.
Hey, thank you. My question is, what are the parameters that go into your data model when trying to decide like which property or which area is a good candidate for repurposing or is eligible for this kind of large-scale utilization, like repurposing in the first place?
Yeah, well, I can speak from the projects that we've been engaged with. I think when it comes to the project in Nashville, I think the area, we were looking at an area of, I think it's called Little Kurdistan, which is the highest Kurdish population outside Iraq. They live in Nashville. And it is interesting because when we looked at the analytics of that spaces, there's a lot of certain areas that are missing from the surrounding, let's say, offering when it comes to retail. So we thought that maybe we need to bring some indoor quality of a shopping mall type of like spaces that is inspired by the Middle Eastern type of like thinking, and at the same time proposing something that the people really need in that spaces. Like, believe it or not, after 8 p.m. over there, there's nothing. everything is closed, and people would be interested in having their kids outside and having really good dinner. So I think we started from there, and basically that's, I think, why that project was a bit successful. Okay, thank you so much.
Hey, y'all. Couple of things. Thank you so much to the organizers. It's very hard to put such a wonderful conference. You're doing a terrific job. It's very hard. Some round of applause to them again. They're doing a fantastic job. Thank you. I was once also a master's student, a PhD candidate. It gets better. The best advice that I can give you is listen to your professors, to your advisors. They know what's good, and they're advocating for you. We had a wonderful keynote address, so listen to them. Gets better. Another note that I need to give, this work that I will present was previously to my role at the City of Boston, so I need to say that everything that I say here, views and findings, shouldn't be interpreted as representing our policies at the City of Boston. Having said that, hello, my name is Sebastian. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation for the Analytics team at the City of Boston. We can talk a little bit after my presentation about what we do, what we hope to achieve, and how we partner with researchers. And I guess I'm glad I'm third because terrific presentations going from a macro perspective to more applications. I'm going to be more traditional in the academic sense that I will talk about a specific thing in a specific context, but just bear with me. So let's begin. And originally this is essentially what happens where the rubber meets the road. Or for the context of this presentation or this conference, what happens when predictive analytics meets everyday decision-making at scale. There you go. And this is a story about many things. It's a story about, I hope not to convince people here, extreme weather events are happening much faster, at a higher intense, in locations that didn't used to happen, and at a higher rate. For example, 2 years ago in Montpelier, Vermont, in a single day, 6 to 9 inches of rain completely obliterated their infrastructure, a lot of physical damages, unfortunately physical and human damages. And these are very localized risks, very impactful, that are very disruptive, and for our conference and for something that matters to us, they can obliterate one of our most precious things, is where we live and how we invest. In North Carolina, for the last 10 years, you just see housing after housing after housing being dragged by erosion. And why is this happening? Multiple reasons. Extreme weather events, we know it's linked to, it's linked to many things, but this is also not just a story about what is known, which is higher extreme weather events, but about access to information. We are powerless somehow to what's happening, but we can adapt, we can mitigate, but we need to learn better, and we need to provide those tools to people. And unfortunately, housing, it's something that a decision that happens today, and by definition, the risks that occur that can affect housing materialize later in life. It's the definition of risk. Can we do something about it? Well, we believe that at the intersection of housing, climate, and technology, we can tackle these type of questions. How do we prepare for climate change, for extreme weather events? Is predictive analytics something that can help us here? When you put that out at scale, does it change people's behavior? How do they change it? And as I was saying, for this specific conference, what happens when you put these models into practice? What happens when you put it into people that are not as sophisticated as academics? How do you prepare it for that they can understand and react? And this story is about flooding. We have other research about wildfires, about droughts, about heat waves, but flooding was a good starting point for us. And as I was saying, extreme weather events, adaptation, as much as mitigation, needs to play a key role. And at the keynote, we learned a lot about adaptation, housing adaptation, building codes, and there are many different, many margins on how people can adapt. I can decide not to move there. I can decide not to build there. Or if I really like this neighborhood, if I live in this neighborhood, if I want to build in this neighborhood because it's profitable, because I invested there, I can invest for adaptive technologies. It's a kind of out of the loop and very far-fetched adaptation where someone in Mississippi literally built a dam around their house and ended up helping there. But it doesn't need to be that drastic. In our research, we basically ask ourselves, can forward-looking adaptation change how people behave in the real estate market? And, traditionally in the United States, FEMA is traditionally the one that talks about flood risk. Why? They create flood maps, they create scores. If you go to their webpage, is that very tricky to understand. It has a lot of legends. It's very difficult to react to it. And the academic circles have documented a lot of shortcomings on how FEMA adapts and quantifies risks. Almost 75% of their risk are older than 5 years. Almost 40% of their whole housing units in the United States do not have a FEMA score, FEMA risk score. Most of the time, when FEMA tries to change how they view flood in a specific place, there are a lot of hearings, there are a lot of politics involved, there is a lot of stakeholder interest. I don't want to make something that was not risky now, because honestly it affects people living there and also the price of how you can sell a thing. Most importantly, they are backward-looking. How they train has these places flooded in the past, and as we know, climate change is changing everything that we know. Places that were not risky, they are now. And we need to be a little bit more forward-looking. And from my opinion, it's not easily accessible. You need to click that link, and then you need to load your specific address where you want to go. And then you need to go through these very complex and not understandable UX. And more importantly, it's not located where actually people take the decision. There is, in the last 10 years, there has been this push to be more precise and be a little bit more forward-looking. Our partner back then was, back in the days, a not-for-profit company called First Street Foundation, where they create property risk models for each climate and specific property. And they incorporate not just past events, as FEMA does, but also they model future risks. They take into account precipitation, tidal risk, pluvial risk, fluvial risk, surge risk, and they also take into account the current adaptation things that each property, each neighborhood has done. They also, and more importantly from our point of view, they take all these very complex modeling into a single score in which they say from 1 to 10, how likely in the next, officially it's from 1 to 10, the likelihood that a property will get a one extreme level weather event in the next 30 years. Why not 30 years? Because traditionally all mortgage rates are 30 years. And they put all this modeling together into a score, as I was saying. This property has minimal flood risk score, all the way to this property has extreme flood risk score. And for our specific case, we thought, there is a gap in how people view risk. There's a potential to adapt and learn from these type of tools. How can we test it? Is it going to change actually how people browse, how people place offers? Can forward-looking risk change how people behave in the housing market? Our hypothesis was, if we put these flood scores out in the wild, where people actually can do something, it will matter only for those people that didn't know that there was risk out there. Because if you have information that is useless to you, you're not going to do anything about it. And how did we do this? We partner with one of the biggest brokerage in the United States called Redfin. It's one of, visually it looks like this. I think hopefully people know about it. You go, you browse, either you're doing, I'm hoping to move to Cambridge, I'm hoping to move to Arizona, I'm just trying to pass time looking at houses. And it's a very, as classic like Zillow, like Redfin, like Compass. It has an intuitive way of searching for stuff. You can go to specific neighborhoods, and we partner with them because it's not just, they were very interested in learning about it, but also they are a brokerage. What does that mean? That is not just, you go like in Zillow to browse and say like, oh, I want to see this web page or I want to see the other one. By being a brokerage, we can actually know when people search for something, when people tour something, when people place an offer. So we have the whole funnel of how flood risk information can affect. And we propose, let's run an experiment. Let's put it out there. Let's run a randomized control trial. We partnered with them. We told them, why don't you, on every day of the day for 3 months, in all of your listings, this is, for example, you go to your phone, you can see public facts of a property or a listing. You have, in that case, a Redfin estimate. You have some neighborhood information. You can ask a question. You can see a lot of pictures, very pretty. But then, why don't you randomly allocate half of the people that browse your website to look at the status quo, and half of them, why don't you introduce the flood risk into the listing in a place that is actionable, where they actually can react to new information? In this case, look at the tile to the left, status quo, but then we introduce a new tile that is called flood risk, where we describe what's flood risk, and we introduce the 1 to 10 score. We also introduce the likelihood over time that a housing, that specific property can experience flood. And we threw them to some more extra FEMA information, and in case they needed, extra information about flood insurance. And we let it run. We let it run for 3 months. The graph to your left tells you basically when someone browses Redfin, you randomly allocate them into, I'm going to be able to see this and not. And by randomly allocating people into treatment and control, you can actually say with confidence, people change their behavior because of the new information, not because something else happened. It was a scale. We were able to bring 1 million users over 12 weeks. We were able to understand how they browsed, how they favorite their specific listings, what they eventually toured, how they place offers on what, and how much they ended up pricing. Bidding for each property. And now to any questions in how we did this? Is it time? Okay, for the results. It turns out that it matters. It matters quite a lot. Before going there, we were able, before they entered the experiment, to see what they were browsing. For example, people were browsing on average properties that weigh high risk, medium risk, and low risk. They didn't know this information, but we knew. We knew because we knew what we were browsing on average. And we put them into buckets. A bucket on average, before the experiment began, you were browsing low flood risk properties, medium flood risk properties, and then high. This is a graph to your left. On average, those ones that got access to the risk score started browsing properties that were on average between almost 2.5% to almost 7.5% less flood risk. And more interestingly, the graph to your right, it tells you that they adapted as time passed. The vertical line, the dotted line, tells you once they started to have or get access to information. You can see the line starts going down. They start browsing properties that are less risky and less risky and less risky. It's a constant adaptation. There was a very big concern about maybe people will stop interacting with us. Redfin was maybe you will scare them away. People will just want to stop browsing. But it turns out that it didn't scare people away. People didn't know. People reacted. For example, among those ones that had access to this flood score, they browsed as much as those ones that didn't have access to this. They interacted as many seconds with with Redfin's webpage. What we notice is that they actually started favoriting in a different way some properties. Notice a little bit that those ones that didn't know that a place was low risk score, they're starting to favor it more, and the other way for the other one. We also didn't notice people kept booking tours. People kept booking offers. We didn't see a difference between those ones that had access to the flood score, whether they actually started a tour, whether they actually placed an offer. But the most important thing that we found, and I think it's that it actually changed where people placed an offer. Those ones that had access to flood risk scores, they started bidding in properties that had on average 50% less risk. What does that mean? It means that you kept offering, you kept interested, and you kept active in the funnel of the searching of the housing search process, but then you changed where you place an offer. If information was already known to people, we would never see anything change here, right? And the new news here is for those ones that were browsing high-risk properties, once they knew, you completely changed. Another thing that we found, they went through the searching housing process faster. On average, people that had access to this didn't need to go over and over to other sites or to other information. They placed offers on a faster pace. Those ones that had access and were browsing low-risk scores, they placed an offer almost 2.5% less time. Those ones that were on the high-risk score, almost 5% less of your time was given back to them to actually do other things that matter. We have a lot of information here, and we have much more, and I think I'm running out of time. But some concluding thoughts. We have the paper online. You can take a look at it. But we found that it matters. It matters for people that didn't know that they were at risk. Very important here, I'm not advocating about the quality of the model. I'm advocating that people are hungry for this type of information. Had they not been hungry, they wouldn't have reacted to it. We didn't find any difference between people, political type of we didn't see any difference between those ones that selected as being Republican, as being Democrat. There was no difference in those ones that had a much more in the number of in the quality of the housing, how cost was housing. People really reacted at different spectrums. It was very fascinating how it impacted how people search, how they bid and they closed. We still believe that easy to understand models can be very impactful when they are out there, and especially when they're at scale, in places that people can react easily to them and when they matter. Because if you put them a flood risk score when they are not interested in buying something, they might not react that much to it. And we hope that such type of information actually starts making in this climate disseminity. And we hope that it gets out there, people use it, and we make something about it. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Yes, I can get started. Sorry, just 2 quick questions because I really enjoyed this presentation. I think it's very relevant to the work that I'm doing. So first, in terms of methodology, how did you isolate the effect of particularly the flood risk? And not maybe have it also being impacted by other factors? Was that something that was done in the methodology? And then quickly afterwards, the second question is, I think, what are the barriers that other brokers and similar to the one you've partnered with that are not providing this information? Is it a cost barrier? Is it more of a policy barrier? So getting to that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. It's easier to answer the second one. After we finished our partnership and we published this in the last 3 years, almost all brokers have adopted this type of information. Of course, they show it in different ways. They might show it just a flood risk score, but it has been widely adopted. Originally, Redfin tried to start using it because they believe that the more information you give to a customer, the better. And I guess other brokers adapted. To your former question, how did we make sure that they were not other confounders actually impacting our results. Well, that was the definition of trying to run an experiment, because if you imagine you go, someone that is very motivated about flood, someone that likes to take risks, someone that doesn't like to take risks, someone that doesn't believe in this, by definition, by randomizing this into, you get this by chance and you didn't get this by chance, on average, it fades away. And you just are sure that, if you have enough of people in your experiment, that all those things kind of cancel out. That was the beauty here. I don't know if that, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I suppose a typical question around pricing climate risk and the like an equity aspect to it in terms of environmental justice, neighborhoods, and the like. This made me think about the fact that potentially how do you account for the reduced interest in properties that are in flood risk zones and the lower prices that they might, because opening this information up obviously also means that the market adjusts to that, and that might have a kind of spatial equity impact. I
think that was one of the questions for discussion. I've been thinking a lot about that. There are many ways in which I could answer you, but I'm going to try to answer this way, which is suddenly, but those communities it could be the case when those communities didn't even know that there was risk there. So you can always play the role of, you are, by definition, bringing extra risk to communities that traditionally has faced much more disadvantages, but you could also flip it in the other way. Now that we know that those communities have a specific risk, it comes to how can we help them adapt? How can we help invest more over there? This also goes to the conversation. This was just one flood risk score. It doesn't mean that this is the one that it's the true value or the true. Many more companies have come to place and are coming to say, like, maybe what you were saying was a 10, it's really a 5 because you are modeling differently. I also believe that competition into these predictive analytics can also help alleviate all those concerns. But I would flip it. We are uncovering risks that were not known. And there is a huge road to how to help them. From governments. Again, not speaking by the city of Boston, but we could react to that information.
You were, okay. Georgia Kinatsa from Northwestern University. Thank you so much for your presentation. So you mentioned that Redfin and maybe other brokers will be interested in this kind of information to provide to their clients. I wonder at what point that becomes overwhelming for people. Because it's the same like we experience when we go grocery, we say, oh, you shouldn't eat that, you shouldn't do that. So maybe it would be another good experiment to do, to add information and see at what point those are too much information to make a decision. Yeah,
absolutely. When you go to the supermarket, you see 1,000 types of cereals. You become overwhelmed and you maybe stop consuming. I agree. We have another one when we are providing every risk score at the same time. Wildfire, drought, heat waves, and flooding. More to say about next, but I think it's a very good path to understand the next research endeavor. But one thing that I want to say there is, housing is probably one of the goods or one of the things that really benefits from having more information, because it's something that is very personal to you. Very specific. You can take a house with one room with one bathroom, or you can change it to 2 bedrooms, or you can change it to 3 bedrooms, or you can change it. Now I want it in a place where it is less flood prone, or I don't care about that because I'm going to adapt it. I still believe that because it's such an heterogeneous good, that the more information you provide to consumers in that specific case, the better. I am probably wrong, but I would like to go do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. I will invite our three panelists to the stage, please, for our panel discussion. We will gonna have a quick run of discussion questions, and then we can open it up again for Q&A. So if we didn't get to you for your questions, just hang in there 1 minute, and we will open it up for Q&A. Thank you. Okay. All right, so moving on to the discussion portion of this panel. So thank you so much again for these three very rich presentations. I think there was a very easy flow between the topics that were discussed at different scales, and I'm very happy that we managed to get this together. So the first question that I had prepared for this discussion portion is, as predictive analytics and AI inform urban planning and design, are we at risk of creating self-fulfilling urban futures where data doesn't just describe the city, but also actively constrains its possibilities? And I think it's important to ask this question, particularly in the School of Design, where we're constantly being encouraged, to be creative and think outside of the way we do things all the time. So anyone wants to get us started?
I can go.
Thank you.
I think so. I think there's a risk that, by definition, that you can create a loop. You know, if you now make a specific plot much more, you know, you draft it that you can develop it more easily, or you say that a specific plot is much more riskier to be flooded, or much more at likelihood of experiencing a wildfire. You know, you can create a loop, right? If there is a disseminator, then you perhaps sell that house at a lower price, or you perhaps sell that plot at a higher price, and that ends up affecting how much taxes you are collecting, and it creates a loop. I think, at least as policymakers, we take these predictions as one thing in your toolkit. You don't need to go all for it. You need to have at least think about how was it created, how can it use it, what are the unintended consequences. It becomes more something in your toolkit. Prediction doesn't need to be something that actually, you know, creates the path forward. Think about it when economists create predictions about how the GDP is going to change, how the unemployment is going to change in next years. You know, policymakers don't take that into, you know, it's going to be automatic. You take it as a prediction. And the more you ingrain that into your head, is another thing in your toolkit.
Absolutely.
I think there's two points here to make. First thing is, when it comes to the models that we have with ChatGPT and all of these kind of chatbots, people are using it for some sort of analytics when it comes to using Cursor and Mapbox for some GIS kind of analysis. And I found that they keep on getting to a lot of causal, let's say, findings without even understanding the real essence of the problem. Basically because when you're dealing with data sets, they have several, 2 or 3 data sets rather than all of the data sets that you could have to make decisions when it comes to, for example, comparing this person with a high-tech environment and the urban planner who could also depend on some sort of qualitative analysis as well. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would like to mention is when it comes to these generic models, they trained using general data. And I think we need to have a good quality of data when it comes to the cities before getting into the training of these kind of foundation models, and then from there you could maybe drive some insights. And I think we're still not there yet, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll add to that a little bit in that there's my fear in this, and then there's the reality. And my fear is always that they're using these generative models. We do run into a sort of a feedback situation whereby if you were to take a normal distribution curve, Right? The reality is when you're utilizing those data, when you're asking those questions, where did those answers come from? They come from one standard deviation, both sides of the mean, generally somewhere in around that, maybe a little bit further out. But what that ultimately leads to is that you have this, all of the innovation and all of the new ideas and new concepts come from the tail end of the curve. And that can mean that you don't want to see that lack of innovation and that change and that drive of cities kind of fading away. And that there is definitely an element of fear with how much agency we do give to these models. But then there's also the reality of something else that kind of gets in the way of that, and that is just simply how most cities and policies work. While we have incredibly brilliant, smart policymakers, who are working in all of our cities, governments change every 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and the individuals that come into those positions and the positions of power, they completely change how those cities are orchestrated and the focus that they come on. Even here, looking at, our own mayor, Mayor Wu in Boston. Sorry, I live in Boston. This is Cambridge. I forget. All right, but imagine, you have somebody else come into that position, someone more like along the lines of a Donald Trump scenario. He says, you know what, we're just going to build more skyscrapers. We're just going to go that way. All right, so individual policy and individual wants and needs affect this in a major way depending on who comes into power as well, which kind of leads you to think, okay, it's probably not going to have that much of an effect there as well.
Absolutely. And I do want to see if anyone has a comment or a quick question on that before I move to the next question. Yes, please.
So we all know, there are different cycles. So for instance, the demand cycles or the development cycles sometimes mismatch with the investment cycles. So I'm wondering from your perspective, how to build a model to better match these cycles together so that in each different, cycles, we can engage different investors, if you will. For instance, if the environment is not for development in the short term, but long term it's for it needs to meet certain demand, how do we really match this demand to patient capital so that, we can really prepare for future demand increase? For instance, biotech, right? Right now we're in a crunch in this industry, but in the future, I don't know how you guys see the long-term needs and how to match the capital with this type of needs. Thank you.
I have just one thought about this, and I think this is a great question that requires like a conference by itself. I think the issue with the U.S. is really huge, and if you look at Alabama, for example, Kentucky, Georgia, Chicago, and Boston, they're so different when it comes to the cycles. And the problem with all of the media outlets is that sometimes they combine all of these kind of findings. So where we are now in Alabama, which is at the bottom of the cycle, where like unemployment is really high and vacant sites is really huge, and it's been like this for the last few years. In other areas like Boston is still like at the upcycle. It's still really performing great. So I think the granularity of the data sets that we'll be looking at, I think it matters, and I think at the moment there's a mismatch, and I agree with you.
I think that's a great segue.
Could I just add one small part to that? In that you can't help but think of a specific MIT professor called Bill Wheaton's 4-quadrant model when you think of exactly as you described, but the reality is what you're describing, specifically here in the United States, it's an alignment of risk is really what it comes down to. And the whole model that's based off investment is based off a 10-year model. And it's like, how do we get our return? If we invest our money now, what does that look like 10 years from now? And to be able to change that dynamic, you have to change their perception of the returns that they're going to get and when they're going to get it, because you have to, and there's an alignment of interest. And the reality is, in the financial markets, that's very, very hard to change at this moment in time, unless you have some sort of incentive that's outside of that. So like a sustainability fund that's going to do something better, and you can showcase that there's going to be another element with that. But the reality, and this goes back to some commentary I made earlier on about, that fiduciary responsibility that coincides with that. You might have a sovereign wealth fund that might be interested in doing something like that. You might have a family office that's something to do with that. But institutional capital to change their mind on that, that's the real barrier in all of that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those insights. And I think that's a great segue to the second question that I've prepared for this discussion segment, which again speaks more of at the city scale and really places policy at the center of the conversation that we're having, and with the cycles and so on. So with real estate markets increasingly shaping urban data infrastructures, should we be concerned about the privatization of urban knowledge, and what mechanisms can safeguard the city as a public commons?
I think so, yes. I think when it comes to some of the PropTechs that I've been seeing lately, for example, all of these data, whether it's Redfern or especially when you're looking at the commercial real estate side of things, there is data that these models are trained using these data sets. And these data sets are so skewed and misleading when it comes to for example, the asking price, for example. Talking about that in commercial real estate, can you imagine that we could put an offer 30% of the original price and you still get it? And that doesn't happen usually in housing, but it does happen in commercial real estate. So if your data model and your AI PropTech is training the data sets on these kind of data, which is basically the best wishful thinking that could happen, and the reality is not there, I think this is a key issue. And also, when it comes to data governance, I think this is a big topic when it comes to what's the involvement of the local municipalities and the cities and their involvement with the private sector. At the moment, most of the AI companies, especially with the geo imaging, they do a really great job by identifying, for example, in my case, the underutilized buildings. By taking aerial photos, they could identify that this and that house, they're underutilized because their roof is damaged, for example. So we don't have this amount of information in the public sector. And I think one of the ways is to have these kind of partnerships.
Absolutely. I want to open it up also to Sebastian. I know your work is at the City of Boston, so I'm curious to hear your insights.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I hope I showed that information is as valuable as you can. It's only valuable when you can see it, right? Multiple ways of fixing this. If you don't want to regulate, you need to create the incentives for those companies to actually, open their data sets. You need to also create the scenario or the environment so that they can start competing to see who is the one that is the most accurate. You can also, for example, say like if you agree to enter into this partnership with all these other enterprises, we could potentially see a way in which we will take into account the type of data sets for different processes of the government. Either you regulate or you create the incentives for competition and for people to bring out their data sets. Because yeah, I agree, if it's behind a paywall, it will be useful for only those ones that can pay to cross that paywall, right? Unless we don't create those circumstances to bring it out to all of them.
It's interesting, when you talk about commercial real estate, there's a lot of people that might suggest that it's already privatized with the likes of the $35 billion behemoth that is CoStar. What they have done and how they've orchestrated that and the proprietary data that they now have. But there are some really great examples of certain cities and certain places. I think Barcelona do a really great job of data sovereignty, whereby the private institution or the private PropTechs that are out there, in order for them to integrate with the city, they have to provide a certain level of publicly available information to the constituents of the city and the government themselves. And there is really unique and different ways of orchestrating this. It's not just simply a case of it being public or private. Working together can work really well as well.
Absolutely. I know we're at time, but I just want to open up real quick for a Q&A, if there's any quick questions that we can take before we wrap up the panel. Okay. Well, thank you so much for a morning of super rich discussions. Thank you so much for our panelists for great presentations. We'll now take our lunch break. Lunch will be served for the invited speakers in Porticos, room 123. And then we will convene again 1:15 for our second panel titled Building Intelligence, Control, and Optimize a Human-Centered Built Environment. Thank you.